I want you to imagine what the world would look like if we could all just sit down with one another and see things from one another's perspective. That's what I try to do every day in my classroom. And this does not look like my classroom. You guys look a little bit older than the teenagers I'm used to teaching. That's going to work out well for us today. I'm an English department chair and a teacher at St. Edward's School, and I'm here to talk to you today about empathy. Every good teacher has a driving and motivating principle, and for me, that's what it is, empathy. Through every book we read, through every project we do, through every paper that we write, yes, I still make them write papers, I weave the idea of empathy. And today, I'd like to give you a little window into how I'm doing that in the classroom environment. The first thing I like to do with my students is to make sure they understand the difference between sympathy and empathy. They all know now that I don't like the word sympathy. And that's because sympathy means having pity or sorrow for someone else or someone else's experience. It's me standing outside the experience looking inside or maybe even down and saying something like, I feel so sorry for you. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, on the other hand, even at its root, means in feeling. It's the ability to understand and to share someone else's experience. It's me sitting down with you, putting my arm around you, saying, maybe I haven't had this exact experience, but I've had an experience. I'm here with you, I'm listening, I'm not trying to fix it, I'm just being present. Empathy drives connection. If you're like me, and if you were listening to John, you live in Vero Beach, and you might know what I mean when I say we kind of live in a bubble. It's a beautiful bubble. I love it in here. But I've had a lot of life experiences. I've lived in a village in Kenya with no electricity and no running water. I've lived in the constant rain of Scotland. I've lived in the intellectually charged and politically correct environment of Wellesley College. The point is I have a lot of other experiences to apply to this bubble and to give it context. My students are not always that lucky. So I try to bring them experiences into the classroom that help engage them in the outside world. One that I brought that's based on my time in Kenya is the one that I work on right now. I have 40 students that come to school over the course of a week, and they work one-on-one with students at this school in a very poor rural village in Kenya, and they tutor one-on-one through Skype. The stated goal of this program is to help these students pass a national exam, because in order to go to high school, they have to pass the exam. If they don't get to go. Last year was a really big year because we had our first 3 victories, and they were all girls, and I was so excited. So that's the stated goal. But the real goal for me is to help build empathy. When you take students who are light years apart in terms of their lifestyle and their culture, and you bring them together, empathy can happen. It can be sticky, it can be challenging at times, but it can happen. One particularly striking moment in our process last year was when we had a tough week. We had kids, 2 students out in Kenya with tuberculosis. We had a road washout, so some of them couldn't walk to school. And then on this particular day, there was a political riot and the power was cut. My students were visibly upset, and they expressed sympathy. We feel so sorry for them. They have so little, and now this. 2 weeks later, Parkland happened, and we started hearing expressions of sympathy from the students and the teachers in Kenya, things like, we feel so sorry for you to have to worry about those things in your school. That was a moment for my students. They were really taken aback. They were the objects of sympathy, and it felt uncomfortable to them, and everything shifted in that moment. When you're sitting comfortably inside your own bubble, and someone outside it says, hey, maybe your bubble's not all it's cracked up to be, it forces you to take on a different perspective. It forces you to see things from a new angle, and it helps you grow. That's when students moved in this process from sympathy to empathy. They recognize that things are different in this village in Kenya, but they're not better, they're not worse, they're just different. And now they're better teachers as a result. They're focusing on the things they have in common instead of on the things that are different. And these kids are amazing. I kind of want to spend some time talking about these amazing kids. They give back. They're an incredibly compassionate generation. They're inclusive. They volunteer in communities. They show up to things like gun violence and parades and all kinds of issues that they get involved in. They're amazing young people. They don't have to come, teenagers coming early to school to tutor kids in Kenya. They don't have to do that, but they want to. And so today, I want to give you a little opportunity to think about empathy and applying that empathy to this younger generation. So if you're like me and you're a Generation Xer, or maybe some boomers out there, maybe even some silent generation or the poor beleaguered millennials out there, then you may be familiar with phrases like, young people today, I just don't understand them. Are they ever off of their phones? Boy, when I was their age. And if you are, then you might resonate with this quotation that I stumbled upon the other day. The children now love luxury, they have bad manners, contempt for authority, they show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not the servants of their households. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. If that sounds like something that you kind of get, you're in good company. It was said by Socrates. Not much has perhaps changed. I'm here to break the pattern. I want you to start thinking about your relationship with younger people. So in order to do that, I want us to take the first step in building empathy, which is perspective sharing. I want you to imagine your own childhood. I want you to think for a moment of a place, a happy time in your life, whether it was in the summer or after school before you got called in for dinner. I want you to find that place. I hope you have that place in your childhood, and I want you to find it. And now I want you to imagine what the experience of young people today is. I want you to imagine sitting down next to a young person, putting your arm around them, and saying something like, hey, I'm here, and I want to see what your perspective is. So who are these young people? Well, in education, we now refer to their parents a lot of the time as lawnmowers or snowplows. And that's because their sole objective is to mow down any uncomfortable moment or obstacle in their child's path. Even play dates, those sound like a really great thing, practical, but what it is parents observing, managing, and getting involved in natural play between children. They are having fewer and fewer opportunities to manage conflict resolution on their own because parents keep stepping in. Another big one is the fact that they're growing up in a post-9/11 world. For a lot of us, we take for granted that places where humans gather, airports, sports stadiums, music venues, schools, that these places are safe, fun, exciting. For our students, for our young people, they're places where danger can happen. Facial recognition, pat-downs, x-ray machines, metal detectors, that's normal for them. In fact, some media organizations are calling them Generation Massacre. And that's because we now, as an entire country and in this school system here and in my school, we are doing regular active shooter drills in classrooms. We now call them active assailants because they might not show up just with guns. So I want you to imagine children as young as 3 and as old as 18, hiding under desks, hiding in closets, doing what they can to prepare for the possibility that someone comes into the classroom with a gun. This is a really different childhood. As a teacher, I never imagined that I would be trained in gunshot wound care. I never imagined that I would have this app, which I do, on my phone. This is a really, really different childhood. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that phone and about technology. I hear a lot about young people always being on their phone and that they're not communicating and they don't understand personal dynamics anymore. And there's some kernels of truth to that, but I'm here to offer a different perspective. Beyond the very scary fact that there are corporations whose sole mission is to trigger a dopamine response to make these devices more addictive, I'd like us to stop blaming young people. Think back, again, imagine you're 15 years old. You've got questions about life, about your body, about sex, about whatever. And someone comes to you and says, hey, see this thing? You can ask it any question you want. Not only will you get an answer, photos, videos, and no one will know that you asked the question. Would you have said no? I wouldn't have. I could have avoided some seriously awkward moments in my teenage years if I'd had this in my hands. So technology is something that they've always known. They were born into it. They are what we call digital natives. They have never had a choice. They don't know what we know about life without technology. And so that's another thing that I do at school. For 1 week every year, this will be our 5th year running, I take their phones for extra credit for a week, including a weekend. The sheriff's department helps me lock them up. And every day they come in and they share their experience on the board with what it's like. Here's what the kind of stuff that they're saying to me when they hand their phones in. Notice they're talking about being tracked by their parents. Think about this again. 15 years old, and you were out there doing what you were doing. Imagine if your parents knew where you were at every single moment of every single day. Imagine if they were getting notifications on their phone about how fast you were driving your car, or your friend's car that you happen to be a passenger in, or how quickly you started at a green light, or how quickly you came to a stop at a red light. This is the reality for these students. They're being monitored constantly. And most people are surprised when I tell them that they don't really want their phones back at the end. They feel pressured by it, and they love the feeling of being free and away from their phones. The last piece, college. For those who want to go to college, it's a big one. I want you to think again. Think back to when you were applying. If you were going to apply to the college that you went to today, could you get in? I'm not so sure that I could get in. And if I got in, could I afford it? A private college right now can cost $70,000 a year. A public institution can cost $22,000 a year. And that's if you can get in. We don't have to look far to see how well that's going. The college admissions scandal is happening right now, completely unsurprising to those of us in education because the college process is a pressure cooker. Students are constantly being forced to do something different, set themselves apart, be unique, be different. They're managing the expectations of their parents, their teachers, their coaches, all these things. And they're exhausted. They come home after practices, after arts, after all these other obligations. They have hours and hours of homework, during which time, yes, they pick up their phone and they connect with humans through social media because that's the only chance they get. It's exhausting. This is a really different childhood. And when they come out of college, they have massive debt, sky-high housing costs, and a work world that doesn't understand them. I hope that if you're starting to see things a little differently, and you're starting to see young people the way that I do, which is, wow, they're bearing up well under an enormous amount of pressure. If you are, then you're experiencing what I try to get done in my classroom, empathy for other people's experience. If we could all just kind of, instead of bunkering down in a position, if we could crawl out of our bunker and maybe go down into our neighbor's bunker to check out the view or ask some questions to see what twists and turns took them into that bunker in the first place, we'd understand one another more. And if we understood one another more, we'd have more solutions instead of fights. Empathy is the salve that could save the world. Empathy drives compassion. Compassion is an expression of love. So more empathy equals more love, and I'd certainly like to see that as a trend on the nightly news. Thank you.